Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 36 team selection. It's an interesting week as I think it's one where a lot of people might be considering using free transfers. I did use one of my free transfers last week. I'm sure a lot of people also coming out of Gameweek 34 and that free hit there probably also use 2 free transfers, potentially even upwards of 3, to kind of set themselves up for the rest of the season running. What I would say is quite interesting is over the next few weeks, I'm sure some people who might still have chips, have to kind of make decisions like when to triple captain. I think we have some interesting opportunities, like let's say Palmer on 37, just to target that sort of United rotation piece. As far as let's say 38, I think you have that tried and trusted Salah. On a week like this, you've got De Bruyne and Mbeumo, who I find quite interesting. I don't have Mbeumo, so that's or rather, I don't have De Bruyne, and I don't see myself going De Bruyne, so it's not as much of an interesting piece for me. As far as let's say the, free hit considerations for some people who've saved the free hit this late, I think you have an opportunity at probably just using it on 38 because we can and we usually do expect a lot of rotation at the final game of the season, particularly when a lot of things are culminated. So not just necessarily rotation, coming off of, let's say, maybe, final games that will occur on 37 and past that deadline, but also equally just the aspect of a lot of the season's finalized. I don't think so many spots like right now are up in the air when it comes to top 5. When it comes to European spots and chasing sort of best positions within the mid-table and, culminating on a season on a high, playing at home, that sort of thing. So all those considerations, I think, make free at 38 quite interesting. For myself, for my own context, I have no more chips. I've had a pretty rough season so far, as we all know, but I'm looking to end the season on a high. Game week 36, or rather 35, was a little bit of a return to form, I suppose. I had a green arrow, nothing too exceptional, 55 points. We had the captaincy decision go not quite well. Marmoush was absolutely dire versus Wolves at home in what should be a good game on paper, I thought, at least. But he played on the right and it just didn't look great. The O'Brien move was a little bit aggressive. I can totally accept that, but it was sort of with the view in mind to have Ipswich at home in this game week and also to have Southampton at home on 37. Didn't work out at all. I ended up benching Nico Williams for 5 points, and the Kluivert versus Evan Nilsson, what I would describe as close to a 50-50, where I had sort of sided with Kluivert due to penalties, also didn't go my way. So that was sort of net 9 points down, but really I think in terms of decision making, I don't really regret the O'Brien move. Maybe in hindsight, I suppose the Kluivert move was a poor one on his minutes. Maybe there's more game states. I would say that Evan Nilsson actually plays more minutes within, and I don't think they're too different as picks, given that Evan Nilsson has much better underlying data. Kluivert is someone you're hoping for penalties for, but I use the example of Eze and Sarr within the transfer plans. I think it feels really fortunate recently as an Eze owner to have him on penalties, especially when Sarr, continues to get great open play chances and probably hasn't gotten the points to sort of do him justice as a player who's gotten plenty of open play chances. Whereas you have the opposite situation now with Evan Nilsson, who has gotten the open play chances recently, has scored all the goals, converted them. Kluivert also hasn't been playing football too much, but then has come back and played 90 minutes within certain games, but just hasn't really delivered anything when it comes to open play. So I think that's FPL sometimes. And this is a week where I'm going Evan Nilsson. So I suppose if anyone's sort of following me for, bad outcomes, why not play Kluivert this week? Either way, I think it's also a week where a lot of people don't really have a transfer too much to make within the midfield or attacking positions unless they've got room for KDB. But then equally, I think if they actually don't have room for KDB and they're really happy with the team as it is set out, and let's say Marmoush isn't benched, there could be an opportunity to move into a Nottingham Forest defender. A lot of people have sold them as of late. I think actually it's interesting to consider a goalkeeper transfer like Sells. Yes, it's very boring, and I'm sure a lot of people don't like goalkeeper transfers, but I don't think, for example, within my case, I don't have a great goalkeeper for this week, and so I'm kind of hoping for the best. But you have a great opportunity to move into with, lovely clean sheet odds with someone like Sells. Equally, if you don't really have a good sort of 3-piece defense, why not go for a kind of attacking defender within this Nottingham Forest team? And Nico Williams, a great representation of that as well. Equally, I suppose, all their defense. We've seen Milenkovic score plenty of goals this season, Murillo just in the previous match, Nico Williams assisting. Aina probably is the least interesting player, I would actually think, when it comes to actually buying and purchasing a Nottingham Forest defender, but he's gotten a lot of points this season, and some people do love their points. So that's kind of the position that I think, to contextualize Game Week 36 here, we're at. I don't have a plan to make any moves. I think, as I said, I don't really have an interest towards going for De Bruyne, not because I think he's a bad pick, but more simply, when I look at the City fixtures, it's really just targeting this week. I suppose when I look within my own team, the only player who can possibly leave my team is going to be Palmer. And I actually think I'd rather have Palmer on 37-38. So I'll take my chances like so. So having said that, I think the only decision this week is little things like how to play the team out. What kind of outcomes am I looking for? Am I in search of, I guess, more outcome variability? Am I looking to hedge certain outcomes against each other? Little things like that. So if I look at the Rob T market odds, as ever, I think it's a good illustration that there's so many minute kind of choices that a lot of people can make this week when it comes to tweaking that last player on the bench, or whether it's, your eighth attacker, and kind of deciding on who to play. Within my own context, I have clearly a decision to be made, and that decision is probably going to be made over the defense more so. I have, investment into, let's say, players like Nuri. I have also investment into players like Trippier. The clean sheet odds are exceedingly close for Wolves and Newcastle. So I think there's a genuine argument to be made to actually play Ryan Nuri over Trippier, because Ryan Nuri has looked absolutely amazing as of late in open play. And whilst Trippier had, an amazing game recently, it was also with a very, very opportune matchup versus Ipswich at home. But he still has value because he has the home game. And, classically, I suppose Newcastle are a very, very strong defensive team, hence why the clean sheet odds are kind of normalized, I would say. If you were kind of to put Brighton and Chelsea against each other, of course, Chelsea is still the better attack, despite the recent slippage. Another argument or kind of decision that I have to make is this kind of swing between, let's say, Crystal Palace and Newcastle. So I own Henderson, but I also own Pope. And I suppose because I own Palmer, there's this question mark of why not just hope for the best outcome possible within the team and, go into, let's say, playing Henderson, acknowledge that I'm taking slightly worse, I guess, clean sheet odds as of at this moment in time, and hope for the best sort of Palmer outcome, which is basically Chelsea scoring. And that's something I'm actually considering right now. I'm probably in a position this season where I don't have really the need to hedge. I tend not to as well. I kind of tend to maximize my outcomes. So in this case, I hope to play Palmer. I wish to play Palmer, and I think I'll also play Henderson over Pope. So taking slightly worse clean sheet odds, potentially to maybe maximize the range of outcomes that I have. And clearly, of course, I can get the full bad outcome, and I'm sort of foregoing my Newcastle double defense stack here in the hopes that Palmer does well. So that's kind of the plan, generally speaking. I think part of it too is if I was to, let's say, do the opposite and maybe play Kluivert and Evan Nilsson and kind of not hedge around the Bournemouth attack, but to stack with the Bournemouth attack, I suppose it's not as good as leaving Palmer on the table, especially when he has actually come back looking quite good. And Chelsea were fully rested pretty much after winning their own semi-final tie within the European Conference League. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with it when it comes to decisions. So let's just see how that translates into my team selection. So my team selection is going to have Henderson as a goalkeeper, which also means that Pope is going to be my bench goalkeeper. I'll be playing Guardiola and Nico Williams. These are very easy, obvious plays versus the relegation teams. Nuri is the player that I'm going to be playing versus Trippier, so reluctantly benching Trippier. But I also think it's a decision that I'm happy with, as I said, to sort of maximize outcomes. I don't think I'm really losing out on much. There's a propensity, of course, to get bench points as ever, as we've had multiple bench points this season, but I don't think it's necessarily a wrong decision. I think I'm losing, at best 0.1, 0.2 expected value, I suppose, really to maximize on my own team's potentials to get FPL points on the upper threshold of things. So that's the defense. Going back to the Nico Williams point, I think a lot of people are in search of buying a Nottingham Forest defender. And as I've mentioned this season, the underlying stats have actually looked really positive for someone like Nico Williams, as well as someone like Milenkovic, who the market rates a lot when it comes to, when I tend to look at goal scoring odds and things like that. With Guardiola, as I mentioned in the transfer plans, he has the propensity now to play left back, especially with Akanji coming back in, and Nico O'Reilly also getting subbed off quite early within the Wolves match after a lot of sort of mistakes when it comes to turning over the ball and sort of losing his one-to-one duels. So that's interesting, right? Guardiola could hopefully be better. His ownership's exceedingly high. I think actually some people have really been enjoying the fruitful nature of double city defense. I haven't had really the opportunity to move into it, mostly because I decided to go into or opted into it free at 33, but that's, the way things are. In terms of the midfield, Salah, Palmer, Mbeumo, and Eze, I think, are the easy plays. I've decided to bench Kluivert as well. Eze, I feel like we'll still have really good minutes in game week 36. I can't see the minutes being poor. You have effectively 6 days before the next match. I think worst case scenario for players like Eze, you get subbed off a little bit earlier just to sort of maximize the rest versus Tottenham. And then you play the FA Cup final versus Man City after the Gameweek 36 or 37 deadline. So one thing that I think a lot of people might miss is, yes, the Gameweek 37 deadline is actually on a Friday. So you won't actually know the FA Cup, let's say, outcomes. You won't really know the Europa League final outcomes, things like that. And so you kind of have to make decisions on what teams to target in 37, based on, I guess, an inkling of what you think could happen. Like, for example, if you think that Crystal Palace will rotate a lot in Game Week 37, I think that's super possible, right? They play versus Wolves on Tuesday, so that's 2-3 days after the FA Cup final. The same goes for Man City. They're probably likely to rotate quite a fair bit versus Bournemouth, even though they're trying to get, as many points on the board as possible within their top 5 race. And so that's quite interesting when it comes to, keeping your Bournemouth players, knowing that actually it's quite a good game and it's good opportunities to potentially play those Bournemouth players. Equally, it's an opportunity, unfortunately, for Crystal Palace to rotate a little bit. But I do think, my general sense is someone like Mateta is probably more prone to being benched. Why not look at the previous time we had a little bit of rotation before a big FA Cup match? I feel like Eze and Sarr did play. So I quite like this idea here of just keeping Eze and then really just spending all my free transfers on Game Week 38. But I think a lot of people need to make moves this week whilst also kind of acknowledging that you won't have the full information on 37, but you kind of need to make some sort of preemptive guesses. And so maybe it's worth rolling this week, making better moves on 37, and then also just leaving you with a little bit more ammunition when it comes to free transfers to manage whatever crazy mishaps happen on Game Week 38 before the deadline there. On top of that too, I think on Game Week 36, we have the propensity for leaks. So whilst my front line currently right now is Evan Nilsson, Isak, and Marmoush, and that rounds off the team because O'Brien's going to be at the back of my bench versus Fulham away, which actually honestly looks like a good game, but it is an away match. But this is going to be the 3-4-3 that I'm playing this week. We'll talk about captaincy in a moment. I think captaincy within the context of my own team is very, very easily put on Mbeumo. Other people will have the opportunity to move into KDB this week, and I feel like that is a genuine 50-50 type decision, and you probably want to back KDB if you're actually someone who's in search of a little bit more risk in terms of ownership, because KDB's base ownership is very low. 200% of KDB is going to be a lot better versus the field and his base ownership versus, let's say, 200% of Mbeumo versus whatever the EO would be something like, I don't know, 150, 160%. I feel like that's how popular he might be as a pick, because a lot of people do own him and not KDB. Another thing that I'd like to mention, as I said, though, is we do have the propensity for leaks in Game Week 36. So I myself will be streaming on the deadline. We've had some Tony leaks recently. We've had Lazy FPL post. We've had FPL Main Road as well post. And so I think we're going to get leaks on 36. And who knows, that there is a possibility that Pep, as I mentioned within my transfer plans, disrespects Southampton a little bit to the extent that he rotates a bit, or even, maybe gives chances for some other players to play. I don't see myself, living in a world necessarily where Haaland is going to come back into the game and actually start in Game Week 36, which will kind of dramatically change things in my perception of things when it comes to Haaland and sort of managing his fitness. But ultimately, maybe the FA Cup is probably higher priority this time round than, let's say, the semi-final was the other time round when City had a double. And actually, they played KDB effectively for 2 starts within the double and then actually rested him, I suppose, within the FA Cup semi-final. This time round, you could flip things around because of maybe the priority of games and then also simply the sort of evaluation of Southampton as an opponent and a quality, I guess, judgment on them as well. So I do think that's possible. And so what am I going to do in a circumstance where Marmoush is out? I think the simplest move for me to make is to either make a decision between going for Wood or Wissa. I really do like going for Wood, even though I think Wissa on balance has more rounded out fixtures between Game Week 36 and 38. But really, if you're looking at bang for a buck for quality of fixture, looking at the goal scoring odds as well for this specific week alone, and making a decision as much as possible within the short term in mind, I do think Wood is absolutely that exciting of a pick. Yes, Nottingham Forest have looked really poor as of late. And to be honest, this is not against my expectations. I've said many, many times this season that I don't think Nottingham Forest are a good offense or have been a good offense all season long. But when you have these fixtures, then I think you can kind of reverse the argument a little bit, because at the end of the day, this is Leicester at home. This is West Ham away. And Chelsea at home is a tough game now, right? Chelsea actually looks like a really competent defense. But I'd also say that you can put the same argument towards a team like Wolves in Game Week 38, where Brentford are facing them away from home. And that kind of contextualizes things a bit too. When I look at some of the market odds, I can't see too much of a separation between the two picks when it comes to, let's say, the full 3-week curve. So I really think it's a 50-50. And when I think about ownerships now, Wood actually probably has lower effective ownership than someone like Wissa. So I think I would actually lean towards going for Wood, maximize the short-term potential outcome here in this Leicester at home match, and kind of go against what the field is probably going to lean towards if, let's say, Marmoush is benched and they went to a Wissa type move. Wissa is a nice move in the sense that you're kind of backing a good result for Mbeumo as well, right? Generally speaking, I think the attacking outcomes they're not perfectly correlated, but they are loosely correlated. And so if you're backing a good Brentford outcome here versus a really, really poor team, why not move into Wisa as well? I just think that in this circumstance, effective ownership could serve me quite nicely because it is an attacker as opposed to a double defense kind of type of option that can really boost me up the ranks if the outcomes correlate. So that's kind of my thoughts right now. As I said, Wood hasn't had really, significant chances recently, but I don't think when I look at, let's say, the data points in terms of the quality of chances he's getting, I don't think it's changed really over the course of the season. He's had great hotspots because he's been in a huge overperformer this year, but nothing has substantially changed other than he's just not scoring almost, 1 goal per shot or 1 goal per 2 shots, which is already a ridiculous thing. I actually spoke to my friend 11fi early on in the season, talked about Wood, and he actually noted that Wood was the highest XG per shot player, even when it came to like game week 3, and we're looking back at, the previous 365 days of data at that point in time in this season. And so I don't think much has really changed about Wood as a player. It's just that I'm sure a lot of people are looking at Nottingham Forest's recent run of results and just think that that's poor. And the answer is that is poor. But equally, as I said, I think that there are good fixtures here for Nottingham Forest, and there's nothing wrong in trying to target them. So also Wood has penalties, right? That's always a real nice equalizer between Wisa 2, who has amazing underlying stats, but probably does miss that aspect of the game out. So those are my thoughts when it comes to Game Week 36. Thank you guys so much for watching my team selection. I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead. I'll see you guys on the deadline stream, as I said. Hopefully there'll be some interesting leaks that we can react to. Hopefully not a Marmoush benching, because I'd rather save a couple of free transfers and be able to make a decision that's quite distinguished from the rest of the field, other than the sort of Wood versus Wisa conundrum. But that's it for me this week. Take care. Goodbye. And I'll see you guys soon.